Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join our session where we're going to look at APM and its evolution to observability. Today, I'm with two of my colleagues, Rachel Franca and Melanie Achard. How you doing, guys?
Doing
Doing
great, Pete.
great.
How are you?
Awesome. Thanks for joining. In the 1990s, we would label it as the Wild West. I kind of think of myself as maybe a gunslinger at that time. How about you, Rachel? What were you up to?
Maybe not a gunslinger. I slept a lot as a baby in a crib, but that's about it. What about you, Melanie?
No, unfortunately, I had been in the workforce for several years. In fact, I was one of the unfortunate people sitting in the basement in front of a yellow screen monitor trying to write firmware. But those are really long, it's a long, long time ago, Pete.
Yeah, my screen was green, by the way. But when you talk about the 1990s and you talk about APM, that's where it was emerging, even though in a lot of cases people were doing application performance monitoring, didn't even know it was going to be called that. At that time, everything was very siloed, and your logs and your metrics and databases, everything was stored separately. And you had these tools. Some of them were provided by uh, the operating system or the device vendor. So all of these tools were very separate and they were very technical. And quite frankly, you had to get very geeky. You had to really know the application. You had to know intimately the database and database structures and the network to even be able to make any sense out of data that you can get with any of these tools. So back then, the challenge was skill sets. There was only a very unique set of specific skill sets for each of the disciplines required to even try to debug or troubleshoot when a product was in production. So, Rachel, at that time, because of this specificity in the skill sets, who were the people that were doing at this time this thing we started to call APM?
Yeah, so I personally have a much rosier picture of these 90s tech centers in my head because of 90s sitcoms, but I think Melanie and Pete probably remember all too well the idea of a call center and what that meant for people who are having problems with their applications. And basically, you would have to call into one of these places where you knew that the person on the other end of the line was reading straight off of a script of questions that with answers that were completely based off of user error problems. You'd have to really work your way through that list. And then finally, if you kind of proved it was a greater issue, then you could get forwarded to an engineer that actually had application knowledge and the ability to troubleshoot and hop into some debugging tools. And then that process took an additional amount of time that was way too long because when you were talking to an engineer, that was their first time hearing about the issue. So you and that tech center were acting as an alert system, which is far from ideal. So it's extremely time consuming. And also, when we think about the applications, the time it took to get the applications out into the market was also huge. We were working off of waterfall methods. And so it would take 6 months or a year to get a new set of features out to the market. So not only were you working off of maybe applications that were having issues because updates that needed to come out hadn't come out or hadn't been put into the market yet, but also if you're having issues, it was a probably whole day with tech support, which honestly was not a fun time. But those engineers who had the technical knowledge in order to understand what was going on with the application were using some very rudimental tools compared to what we have today. And I think Melanie can tell you a little bit
Yeah.
about those.
Yeah, no, I mean the tools definitely change. I mean, if you were looking at it from a network side, you're gonna have network tools like maybe SNMP tracks and TCP dumps in order to go and find networking issues. If you're looking at performance issues on servers, you may be looking in Windows Perfman or SVCmon just to go and look and see what's going on there, to look on the server side of things. But with each tool, each team using its own set of tools, it made it really hard for them to collaborate on issues that were going to go across them. They were all kind of within their own silo. And there was a great game we used to play, the It's Not My Problem game. So you would try to show that it was the network guy's problem. My app is running fine. I don't know what's going on there. Or was the server didn't have enough resources, or the database had too many threads. I mean, that was the game that you played. It was more the blame game. And as Rachel mentioned, and even Pete, the time frame was so slow when I go back and think about those days. The waterfall dev thing, in order to make changes into an application, we would get feature requests, find bugs, they would go into prioritization. It would take months, years to get these enhancements rolled forward. And what was interesting about it was customers expected that. So it was okay to talk to a customer and tell them that their bug was going to be fixed next January, and that was just an acceptable answer. But fortunately, things have kind of accelerated, right, Pete, as we move into the 2000s?
Oh yeah. By the way, it was pretty painful back then, and Melly and I talked about this before. The way we coped, of course, was listening to awesome bands like Van Halen. I know, Rachel, you don't even know who Van Halen is. We'll have that conversation another time. Yeah, let's move ahead. Let's look at the next couple of decades. We've got 2000, 2010. What's been happening now since this inception of APM? Well, first of all, technology continues to grow. The opportunities that technology provide businesses continue to grow. For the first time, IT is now starting to look like a potential strategic partner to a business rather than a very expensive cost center. In the 2000s, Melly and I were right in the middle of this, right? And as she mentioned, the technology emerging and the new opportunities, and then even and we're going to talk about things like DevOps and different ways to develop. We were trying to understand all the new technologies and how do you tame these new technologies that were being demanded by customers. So let's talk about kind of the first 10 years in the 2000s. You know, you still had these monolithic applications, but over the next 10 years plus, things started to change. And you started to get things like integrations and additional services and APIs. And you start having infrastructures that were being virtualized. So you had little segments of virtual infrastructure that could support different elements. Now, we're not talking about microservices, we'll get there. But now the complexity all of a sudden is starting to grow exponentially. So now you've got newer technologies that are coming out faster and faster, which is wonderful, right? Because it's giving us an opportunity to do things we couldn't do before. So we could solve problems with an existing business that just you couldn't do without this new technology. And you even have some technologies that were helping build a business based on that technology. So lots of good stuff going on, but the complexity growing, the demand from customers growing. Now APM is starting to become something that's becoming more than a nice to have as you go forward. All of a sudden, monitoring this environment takes on kind of a new landscape, and some additional people would be involved. Rachel, tell us a little bit more about how now that's changed from what we just talked about back in the 90s.
Yeah, so a lot of it really started with the idea that you mentioned of IT moving from a cost center to a real strategic piece of the business. And that's because as technology continued to evolve, people were no longer okay with waiting 6 months for the release that fixed their bugs. They wanted bug fixes that would come out when they noticed there was a bug. They wanted new features a lot more often, and they wanted applications that could just do more and more often. And so, really, technology needed to be extremely innovative to give organizations and businesses a competitive edge. And so, with that, IT leaders really rose to a much more prominent place in the business because they needed to be able to go to leadership and fight for both funds for the business as well as showcase how important the changes that they were making. And so there were a few things that happened. One, we had moved from a waterfall method to an agile method of deployment. So releases were getting put out a lot faster. But at the same time, it was also come up with a concept to remove the process of something going from development and then getting released to ops and actually bringing these organizations together so that we could remove those silos and that we could not only release features at a higher and quicker rate, but also release features that were higher quality. So as we are releasing each of these pieces of the application, they weren't causing bugs within the code. And basically, end users would have a lot less problems with their application. And so it led to teams being able to work a lot quicker. But at the same time, it also led to additional complexities within the application, and that needed new tools for their monitoring.
Yeah, no, it really did. I mean, at the very beginning, in the 90s, most of it was really around data gathering. So when we looked at the tools that we were using, then we were trying to go through big text blobs and looking for data when something would go down. But as we move into the 2000s, now we're looking at um, trying to gather data from a lot of different systems. That's when we start to see really purposefully built log analysis tools like rsyslog or syslog-ng come in that would start pulling data from across the network into one centralized place so that you can actually search on logs and log data in one centralized fashion. But it wasn't just for log monitoring that we started to see these like purpose-built tools. We started to see the same thing for ticket management, for alerting systems, one tool to generate alerts across the entire organization. And as Rachel mentioned, the time frames are shrinking. So the early 2000s, still waterfall, weeks, months for a thing to get fixed. Now we wanted to get it turned around more quickly. And so we were trying to constantly prioritize and build this agile sprint model. And as she mentioned as well, availability started to become a really big deal because every single hour that something was not available, it was viewed as an impact more largely to the business, maybe not from an e-commerce perspective, but even if users can't log into the systems that they need to in order to do their work, there was a perceived cost associated with that. So as these tools are starting to come together, you're going to they towards the mid part of the 90s, you see even this consolidation of these purpose-built tools into one centralized place. So if we're going to go back to our Microsoft example, if you remember, the combination of Sysmon and Perfmon all came into the Microsoft Management Console. And this idea of consoles started to come in too, because with all of these tools coming together, there was this idea that we needed to have one big tool that could keep track of it all. I think Pete and I will remember going into these network operation centers where you walk in and there's a big screen up on the wall that's got all the charts and the dashboards, and there are alerts going on, and it's telling you how healthy your IT system is at that moment. So those were actually separate pieces of software that you would purchase to bring all of this data together and make it visible and measurable, and to Pete's point, reportable to the business. What was interesting though is all of these charts and graphs that are pulling this data together, it was still up to humans to decide what the threshold was. What is availability? Is it are we trying to shoot for a service level of 90% up, so 10% is okay, or are we trying to look for a certain period of time? So all of that was still on IT to set what the good numbers were and what were bad numbers. But Pete, that's going to change, doesn't it, as we kind of go forward?
Yeah, so let's kind of now, okay, we're cooking here. Let's go to the next step. Let's look at what's happened over the last few years to where we are right now. And I'll tell you, maybe 5 years, even longer, there's been this whole tool consolidation, on the monitoring side, especially. Like, I can't have all these disparate tools. Where for years it was very siloed, and it was okay for one person who'd use one tool to dig out some information about a specific discipline, whether it's network or database or whatever. Well, then there's been all of this tool consolidation. Much of it was about money because it was too darn expensive to buy all these tools for every single thing you needed. And then it started to be about a training and, how easy it is to learn a tool. Well, if I've got one integrated platform, I have that capability to use that tool and probably learn how to use it for all the different disciplines. It wasn't as much about I needed to bring it all together because I needed to look at the overall solution or the business service. And that's kind of where we are today. This shift and APM, where in the beginning we didn't even know what it was when it was APM, to where we knew what APM was, but now that was only for the developers or the application guys, and they would geek out on code level monitoring. Well, APM is now kind of required. We've added end user, not we've added, the market has decided the end user experience on the client side is just as important as the server side. So this evolution to where we are today, it's made a big difference in all of our lives. I will tell you though, if there's one thing I can say about what's happened over the last 4 years, and I know it's going to be a little redundant, but the complexity continues to grow, and the opportunities to do things we never could do before, that continues to grow. There is little to no tolerance from the business owner on a slow application or a failed application. So, as an IT professional that's responsible for keeping this stuff up and running and basically keeping the business up and running, the pressure is higher than it's ever been. The stakes are higher than it's ever been. And that's why APM at this point, I believe, is actually a requirement. Now, the other thing that's changed is an expansion of those people responsible that can take advantage of an APM. Rachel, tell us more about who's using this thing we called application performance monitoring.
Yeah, so it's totally a reliance on the insights that APM can provide. I can say that as someone who has lived her adult career in a world that is very online and global, I've been blessed to live in a world where I expect an application or a website to be available to me, whether I am at home, I'm out, I'm on my laptop, I'm on my phone. I expect it to be up and available to me. And so that's where we see even more than before that IT is woven into the core of the business's success. And so what that means is there's even more visibility for IT leaders to basically fight for their teams up to leadership. And so we see that if a board of directors or an executive team notices something wrong with an application, they're not going to go to an IT leader and ask, "Hey, are the servers up?" They don't care about those technical questions. They're going to ask something like, "Hey, why is the website down?" Or "Why can't people log in?" Or "Why are sales down in a specific region when they shouldn't be?" And so then it really falls to the IT leaders to be able to very quickly know basically everything about the application and its underlying ecosystems. So in this world, they really can't be relying on 10 different products to get a full picture. And because of that, that's led to a lot of innovation within the APM space and the tools that these people are using. Right, Melanie?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I would say just what you guys have both described. Looking at what we're going through right now with the pandemic has just been an obvious example of it, where the business is more and more reliant on IT to keep it up and going, and there's very little tolerance for not being able to log into a website or start a conference call. What's also interesting about APM, I talked early, the 70s, 80s, and 90s about it really being a monitoring thing, where we were trying to collect data from all these different systems and sifting through the logs. Someplace in the 2000, we decided, oh, hey, maybe we should measure, make metrics and add alerts. And so all of those kinds of things got added into it. But as Pete mentioned, and Rachel as well, as you start to bring development and operations together, so you have these two different groups who are working together, and you bring in other individuals too, other groups like the SRE team, QA, the support team, perhaps even the application owner, into all of these different, all into this, they're all looking for different kinds of data. So monitoring gets expanded, or APM gets expanded beyond just log data to start looking at user data, start looking at interactions from once the user clicks on a button, all the way down through the application to the underlying infrastructure, down to the cloud potentially the cloud hosting provider as well. So it really is a much larger view. And so the tools then need to evolve in order to be able to do that. What's really interesting is when you get into DevOps, it's now worked its way from just cloud native Google, Facebook type apps all the way into mainstream America and across the world where consolidating developers and operations into one team is allowing them to collaborate. And when developers start becoming responsible for the code that they write, they suddenly want to write it in a way that it can provide a lot more information if they're the one who has to troubleshoot it. So you start seeing code actually instrumented to allow to surface more data around what's going on at the application level and to make it easier to troubleshoot and measure. Um, and this idea of having tools that are being shared by teams is also breaking down that wall that I mentioned, this like throw it over the wall game. Now we're all jointly responsible across the organization, from application owners and business owners all the way down to IT and developers, to try to make the application as resilient and as performing as possible. Um, and we're even getting smarter with the kind of data we're using. In the in that network operations center that I talked about earlier, where we all set the thresholds kind of like based on what we thought was a good performance. Now we're letting the data decide what's good performance. We're using historical data and identifying what a normal threshold would look like and what would be an anomaly one way or the other. And we're actually using the data to help inform our decision making. And I think, as both Pete and Rachel also have said, that response time now is no longer measured in days or months or even hours. It's down to the millisecond. And so that kind of need to be quick, and that complexity that's being talked about, that's when we really need to take in a whole nother approach. I mean, Pete, how would you want to bring this forward?
I will tell you right now, there is no business that's not reliant on IT to some level. And as I mentioned earlier, in many cases, there are businesses that are literally built because of technology. So where does it go next? Right? Well, again, when you talk about observability versus APM or infrastructure network monitoring, it's truly understanding the state of the business. And that's more holistic than just looking, say, at the full stack of an application. That's very important. But what about my e-commerce system that's made up of multiple applications? What about my supply chain flow that helps me drive my business out the door? How do I get a sense immediately how those elements of the business are doing? And a lot of stuff has to come together. So when we talk about consolidation, we're also talking about how do we have insights to all these moving pieces. Oh, by the way, part of these things are running in one data center, in another data center. They're running in a public cloud, multiple clouds, some mixture of all of them. That's where what we believe in the future, to truly deliver on observability, you're going to need the capability to really build intelligence beyond what we ever have before into these solutions. We're going to need to build more predictive capabilities. The challenge we're going to have is being able to keep up with all of this stuff that's happening. And we're going to continue. The one thing that hasn't changed in IT, we're going to continue to be resource constrained. So in the future, intelligence built into these ever converging disciplines that turn into what we call observability is real important. Now, again, we continue to expand who the people are to take advantage of this, especially when these lines blur. You're now bringing multiple traditional disciplines in together. Rachel, tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are when it comes to that.
Yeah, especially as applications are more important to the business, a lot more groups will rely on the software that monitors it. And when we think back to the first era that we talked about in the 90s, you really had to be a technical person, an engineer, to understand what was going on with the application, and no one really else cared about it. But more and more now, you have groups like application owners and SEO teams that care about the core vitals of a web app to make sure that it's ranked well and getting users. You have marketing and sales teams that have to meet quota, and they're concerned about the performance of a website to make sure that they're getting to that quota that they need to. And so they all have a stake in the performance of an application, and they're all going to want to understand how it's performing. And so, with the additional technical complexities that Pete talked about from data center and architecture, at the same time, APM needs to be more consumable by these groups, meaning that it needs to be more and more simple, not more complex to match the application. And so, looking forward with that consumability, it needs to provide both the information that each of these groups need, and it also needs to help provide business insights for the growth of applications, and so that groups like a board of directors or leadership can make strategic business decisions based off of the observability of their APM products.
Right, which means that the tools need to adapt, because if the people are going to be going and be having different roles and going all the way from the C-suite all the way down and across the entire organization, you need tools that can deliver the information in a way that those individuals can consume it. And the data is no longer just technical, as you guys have both talked about. It's also very business related. But what's cool about it, just like what we saw in the last 10 years, where the data started to give you the type of insights to tell you what was good behavior, what was bad behavior for a particular system, and let you find anomalies really easily, we're also starting to use machine learning and other types of artificial intelligence to start to understand and provide insights, and insights that are relevant to all those different individuals. So now these systems are going to be used, are going outside of IT to help drive real business decisions all the way around. So I'd mentioned the automation, which is very similar to the types of automation that we were seeing in the DevOps world, where we were trying to automate builds and automate some level of change management. Now this automation is going to actually be able to create systems that could be self-healing, so that they could actually detect an issue or a resource outage or bottleneck and immediately adapt, potentially spin up another container or instance to that new condition. And even if we don't want to put that automation in play, we could at least still build in that type of intelligence, so that no matter which individual is the one trying to figure out what's going on or how to fix it, that intelligence, the system alone, will tell you what you need to do to identify the problem and to remediate that problem. The other thing to think about is that it's expanding outside of traditional IT. We're now bringing in security data. We're also bringing in consumer data. We're bringing in competitive data. So even the data landscape for these tools is expanding greatly. Pete, any closing thoughts on this?
What we look for you guys to do is keep your eyes open, get in touch with the folks within your company that are touching these different disciplines, and you guys should be doing a little more collaboration, because over time you're going to see it is going to become more and more of a melting pot. What I've seen since I've been at SolarWinds, I've seen a couple of things happen over the last 20 years. We've evolved as a company. We've evolved as the customers evolved, as technologies evolved, and you'll continue to see us do that. Matter of fact, you're going to start to see some of the things, if you haven't heard already, about where we're going with our next generation of solutions. And you should be as demanding as you ever have been about what you need as we go into this new world. But other than that, I hope you did find some level of value in what we talked about today, especially as we embark on what's next here with observability, as you're moving from APM and infrastructure and network and security monitoring. Rachel, Melanie, thank you guys so much. Anything else you want to share with the team? Otherwise, I think we're ready to go.
Oh, thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
And I hope to see you guys in the future as we go forward.